She raised her champagne glass, looked her boss in the eye, laughed, and pointed at me. Paul runs his cute little startup. Won't pay our bills, but hey, we'll let him dream, right? 40 people heard it. 40 people smiled. I smiled too. That was the last mistake she ever made about me. My name is Paul Braftoft. I'm 46 years old. And for 19 years, I was married to Beverly, Senior VP of Global Product Development at Loomis Beauty Group. A woman who walked into every room like she owned it. A woman who, for a long time, I genuinely believed she did. I'm a tech guy. Always have been. Supply chain software. Not glamorous. Not the kind of thing you describe at a cocktail party and watch people lean in. But it works. It scales. And for the last 2 years, the numbers had been doing things I stopped letting myself predict out loud. Beverly never thought much of it. She had her world, 5-star dinners, European product launches, a LinkedIn profile that read like an award ceremony. My world was quarterly pipeline reviews and late-night debugging sessions. She'd grown comfortable treating the gap between those worlds as proof that she was the engine of our household. I let her believe it. That was my plan. The party. Beverly organized her own birthday party. She always did. Private dining room at the Stonegate in downtown Nashville. 40 guests. Flowers flown in from Atlanta. A photographer circling the room like a satellite. I wore a suit that cost more than she knew. I drank sparkling water all night. I had a 6:30 a.m. call with our Singapore distribution partner. I shook hands, made small talk, smiled when I was supposed to. Her boss, Douglas Merritt, was there. Kathleen Park, the VP she'd been courting for a joint venture, was there. A dozen other people whose approval Beverly collected the way other people collect stamps. Around 9 p.m., Beverly was holding her champagne, laughing at something Douglas had said, when she turned and gestured toward me. Paul is such a sweetheart, she said, loud enough for the table to hear. He runs his cute little startup. Won't pay our bills, but hey, we'll let him dream, right? She winked at Douglas. She gave me that smile, the one she thought looked affectionate. The one I'd learned to read as something else entirely. Douglas chuckled. Kathleen gave me a polite nod. A few others smiled with their mouths. I raised my glass of sparkling water. Said nothing. Nodded once, like a man who'd heard a joke that wasn't funny, but wasn't worth the energy. Inside, something clicked. Not anger. Not humiliation. Something colder and more useful than either of those things. The decision. On the drive home, Beverly chatted about the evening, who looked good, who'd had work done, how Kathleen had complimented her earrings. She didn't ask me a single question. I watched the city lights slide past the window and thought about a folder sitting in the back drawer of my home office desk. A folder with one name written on the tab, in pencil. Raymond Peake. I hadn't opened it in nearly 3 years. By the time we pulled into the driveway, I had already decided. I told Beverly I had early calls. I disappeared into the guest room. She barely looked up from her phone. I didn't sleep. I opened my laptop, pulled up ChainSync's financials, and looked at the numbers for a long time. Month-over-month retention was up 14%. 3 enterprise contracts had cleared legal review. Cash position was the strongest it had ever been. Then I opened the folder. Found Raymond's number. Typed 3 words and hit send. Time to talk. His reply came at 11:47 p.m. Name the place. Who is Raymond Peake? Raymond Peake lived in a farmhouse outside Woodstock, Vermont, and hadn't practiced law in 4 years. But the man who answered the phone at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning sounded like someone who had never stopped thinking like a lawyer. You sound like you've been up all night, he said. Close enough, I told him. Then let's not waste the morning. When can you get here? I booked a flight to Burlington for Thursday. I told Beverly I had a partner summit in Boston. She nodded from behind her coffee mug and asked me to grab more French roast on my way back. That was the entirety of her interest in my travel plans. I found Raymond on his porch with a thermos and a legal pad, already writing. 67 years old. Lean. Wire-rim glasses. The kind of stillness that comes from spending decades in rooms where every word costs something. We shook hands. He poured coffee. We Saturday. Tell me what you're looking at, he said. I handed him a thumb drive. 18 months of research I'd been compiling quietly. The corporate structure of Loomis Beauty Group. Its parent entity. The holding companies above it. The venture debt layered through the whole stack. Raymond scrolled without speaking. Then leaned back. Paralyzed capital, he said. They're the majority stakeholder, overextended. They took a significant hit on a clean energy acquisition in Brazil. Floating rate debt. They've been quietly shopping assets. Loomis is one of them, I said. Not yet. But they will be. Raymond looked at me over his glasses. Someone like you. Structured correctly. Nothing with my name on it, I said. He picked up his legal pad. And started writing. He sat across from one of the sharpest legal minds in the country, handed over 18 months of quiet research, and said 4 words. Nothing with my name on it. That's where we left Paul Braftoft. Now let me tell you about the people he called next, because no great plan is built alone. And Paul? Paul had been building his team in silence for a long, long time. Victor Crane. The return. 8 years ago, Paul and a man named Victor Crane co-founded ChainSync together. 2 guys, 1 product idea, a shared co-working space near Midtown Nashville. Beverly had never liked Victor. Too rough around the edges, she'd said. Not the kind of partner that reflects well. She'd made her opinions known with that quiet persistence she used when she wanted something done without appearing to demand it. By year 3, Victor had bought out and walked. Paul let it happen. He'd carried that since. But Victor had landed more than just on his feet. He'd taken his buyout, invested it well, and was now running a boutique venture fund out of Atlanta, with a reputation for finding undervalued mid-market technology plays. Paul texted him from 30,000 feet. I've got something I want to walk you through. Not over the phone. Victor replied in 11 minutes. Atlanta or Nashville? Nashville. Next week. Done. Victor showed up 15 minutes early, which told Paul everything he needed to know. They sat down. Paul laid out the full picture. Loomis. Parallax Capital. The debt exposure. Raymond's involvement. The shell structure taking shape in Delaware and the Caymans. Victor listened the way he always had, without interrupting, one hand around his coffee, eyes steady. When Paul finished, Victor leaned forward. What do you need from me? Capital participation and connectivity, Paul said. You've got relationships with 2 of the distressed portfolio funds holding Parallax debt. I need introductions. Quiet ones. How quiet? Nothing traceable back to ChainSync, or to me personally. Victor nodded slowly. Then said, I want to be clear about something first. This isn't about your wife. Paul looked at him. I mean that as a business principle. The moment this becomes personal, the structure gets emotional. Emotional structures leak. Whatever she did, and I can imagine it, stays outside the room. Agreed, Paul said. He meant it. Because Victor was right. He always had been. Ethan Bowman, the weapon. The next piece was Ethan Bowman. 27 years old. Data analytics. 18 months at Loomis Beauty Group, terminated, per the gap in his LinkedIn timeline, about 2 years prior. Beverly had fired him personally. Told HR he lacked presence. Wasn't executive material. Paul found him through an industry contact and met him for lunch at a diner on Charlotte Avenue. Before Paul could even start, Ethan said, I know who you are. I figured this conversation would happen eventually. What makes you say that? Paul asked. Because I know what Loomis looks like from the inside. And I know what someone who's actually paying attention looks like from the outside. He picked up his coffee. So, what do you need? Paul told him to finish his sandwich first. Then he told him everything. Within 10 days, Ethan produced a 40-page internal analysis of Loomis' parent structure, subsidiary maps, historical vendor contracts, and a detailed breakdown of exploitable licensing clauses. He flagged one in particular, a legacy exclusivity agreement with a European fragrance distributor that prohibited third-party licensing arrangements in the Asia-Pacific region without written consent from the original party. The clause had been drafted 7 years ago, largely forgotten, buried in a contract renewal that Beverly's legal team had rubber-stamped without deep review. She's going to move on Asian markets, Ethan said calmly. Her Q3 projections have been circulating internally. She's under pressure to show international growth numbers. And when she does? Paul asked. She'll trip this clause without realizing it, especially if the right opportunity is sitting in front of her at exactly the right time. Paul looked at Ethan across the table. 27 years old. Calm as still water. Eating a sandwich like they were discussing weather patterns. Beverly fired you personally, Paul said. Did it make you angry? Ethan thought about it for a second. It made me accurate, he said. Angry wastes energy. Accurate gets results. Paul decided then that he was the best hire he'd made in years. James Wu, the bait. The final piece was James Wu. Paul had known him since the earliest days of ChainSync, before it even had a name. James had been running a mid-size electronics distribution operation out of Shenzhen, and he'd taken a chance on a 3-month pilot when nobody else would. Paul called him on a Sunday evening. You're calling about something real, James said. It wasn't a question. I need a favor that looks like a business opportunity, Paul said. A licensing approach. Fragrance distribution. Asia Pacific. Structured to look attractive to a company that's hungry for regional numbers. Silence. Who's the company? Paul told him. Another silence. That's your wife's employer. Yes. And the contract will have problems. Carefully constructed ones. 5 full seconds of silence. Then. You know what, I owe you. Send me the framework. I'll review it by Wednesday. The trap closes. James's distribution subsidiary reached out to Loomis Asia Pacific Development Team with a licensing proposal that looked exactly like the fast-track regional opportunity Beverly had been hunting for her Q3 numbers. Good margins. Established infrastructure. A clean-looking contract. Beverly's team reviewed it in 72 hours, because she'd pushed for speed. Speed was her brand. Her signature. Her competitive identity. Ethan had said, she doesn't read contracts. She reads summaries. Her assistant flags the commercial terms, price, timeline, territory. Beverly makes the call in under 20 minutes if the numbers look right. The legal review is a formality. She treats it like a speed bump. He estimated she'd sign within a week of receiving it. He was off by 2 days. She signed in 5. Paul found out from James on a Saturday morning. A single text. Done. Your move. That afternoon, Beverly poured herself a glass of wine at 2 p.m., put on music in the kitchen, and told Paul that her Asian expansion initiative was going to define her Q3 performance review. She was talking about a promotion. Not speculating. Stating. Things are really moving, she said, swirling her glass. Sounds like it, Paul said. He was standing at the kitchen counter, going through the mail. One of the envelopes was a brokerage statement. The account in Beverly's name alone. The one their financial auditor had traced through 4 years of quiet redirections from their joint investment accounts. $41,000 moved in increments small enough to avoid triggering review. Paul set it in the folder he kept locked in his desk. His attorney, Nora Vale, had been copied on 3 months of documentation. Beverly filed for divorce 3 weeks later. She walked in one Tuesday evening, calm and rehearsed, and announced they'd grown in different directions. She handed him her attorney's card. Paul took it, looked at it, said he'd be in touch with his representation. She seemed mildly surprised he didn't argue. She'd prepared to win. Instead, he put the card on the counter, poured a glass of water, and asked if she wanted dinner. What she didn't know, what her attorney didn't know, was that she'd filed for divorce in the middle of a corporate acquisition in which her career, her equity, and her entire professional identity were about to be fundamentally restructured. Her attorney was preparing a standard high-income divorce case. Nora was preparing something else entirely. The trap is set. The structure is built. Beverly is walking, confident, unknowing, straight toward the most important boardroom of her life. And Paul is already sitting at the far end of the table, where everything comes together. The boardroom. The silence. The moment Beverly finally understands. Subscribe right now and hit the notification bell, because part 3 is the one you came for. And trust me, you don't want to read the comments before you watch it. There's a moment, in every plan, every story, every long game played in silence, where patience stops being a virtue and becomes a verdict. This is that moment. The last visit to Raymond. The week before closing, Paul drove to Vermont one final time. He and Raymond sat on the porch with coffee and October cold, going through the final sequence together, the closing mechanics, the integration structure, the board notifications, the specific morning Beverly would walk into her office building not yet knowing the company she'd given her entire identity to had a new owner. "You thought about what you're going to say when she figures it out?" Raymond asked. "I'm not going to say much," Paul told him. "That's been the whole point." Raymond nodded. Then, quietly, the only personal thing he said all afternoon. "Your father would have liked this." The call with Ryan. On the drive back to Burlington, Paul called his son, Ryan. Between classes. Eating lunch in the student union. Picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Dad. What's up?" "Just checking in. How are midterms?" "Surviving. Barely." A pause. "Is everything okay? You sound, I don't know, settled." "Yeah," Paul said. "I think I am." Ryan had always asked about ChainSync with genuine interest. Had since he was 16, when Paul walked him through the product logic on a whiteboard in the garage. "Mom called me," Ryan said. "She said the divorce is getting complicated. Said it was because of your business stuff." Paul chose his next words carefully. "Ryan, in the next couple of weeks, some things are going to become clear. I'm not going to ask you to take sides. But I need you to trust that I've handled everything the way it needed to be handled." A pause. Longer than expected. "I've always trusted that, Dad." Paul drove the rest of the way to Burlington without the radio on. The boardroom. The boardroom was on the 41st floor of Loomis Nashville headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling glass. Long table in dark oak. The kind of room designed to communicate authority to whoever sat in it. Beverly walked in at 9:22 a.m., 8 minutes late. She was scanning the room. Unfamiliar faces. Her CFO wasn't in his usual position. 2 HR representatives stood against the wall like sentinels. The legal team from Ardenville Partners sat stone-faced. 2 board members she recognized weren't making eye contact. Then her eyes landed on Don Harriman, her trusted boardroom mentor, the man who had championed her career for a decade. He was staring at his legal pad. He didn't look up. Then she saw Paul. He watched the sequence happen across her face in real time. First, confusion. Her brain running a check. Why is Paul here? Then, the beginning of a rational explanation forming. Something that still made sense in the world she understood. Then, that explanation failing. Then, something else entirely. Paul didn't stand. Didn't smile. He opened the folder in front of him and said to the room, "Let's get started. We have a lot of ground to cover." Beverly's voice came out controlled, which told him she was working harder than she looked. "Paul, what is this?" "A transition meeting," he said. "Effective this morning, Ardenville Partners holds a controlling interest in Loomis Beauty Group through its parent acquisition of Parallax Capital. I'm the principal of Ardenville." The CFO seated 2 chairs from Beverly closed his eyes. "That's not," Beverly started. Stopped. "You can't just," she stopped again. Paul looked at her steadily. "The documentation is in front of you. The legal team will walk through the transition structure in detail. Your role remains intact through Q4 with performance review at the start of the new cycle. Beverly's voice dropped, not to a whisper, but to the register people use when they want the room to pretend it didn't hear something. You built this to get back at me. Paul held her gaze. I built this because I know how to build things, Beverly. That's what I've been doing the entire time you were telling people I couldn't pay the bills. The room was silent in the way rooms get when everyone has stopped breathing at the same moment. Beverly sat down. Not because she decided to. Because her legs made the decision for her. Don Harriman kept his eyes on his legal pad. Paul turned to the Ardenville legal team and said, "Let's begin." The aftermath. No dramatic speech. No revenge monologue. Just paperwork. Executed by professionals. Nora Vale's case was airtight. The prenuptial agreement Beverly had signed with a wave of her hand and a comment about how lawyers make everything complicated contained a financial misconduct clause. 3 years of documented transfers. 4 months of brokerage statements. $41,000 redirected from joint accounts. Beverly's attorney had found the prenup. Beverly's attorney had gone quiet. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Paul kept chain sync. He kept the house. He kept his integrity. Beverly kept her role at Loomis, reporting, now, to a board that included the man she'd once called a cute little hobby. Ryan called Paul the weekend after the closing. "I heard," he said. "You okay with all of it?" Paul asked. A long pause. "I think," Ryan said slowly, "that I always knew you were the bigger person in that marriage. I just didn't know how much bigger." Paul didn't respond right away. He walked to the kitchen window. Looked out at the backyard. The same yard where he'd watched the neighborhood lights go out the night Beverly signed the Aisha deal. "Get back to your midterms," he finally said. Ryan laughed. "Yeah. Love you, Dad. Love you too, kid." And that's the story of Paul Braftoft. Not a story about revenge, though the world likes to call it that. It's a story about a man who never once raised his voice, never once begged to be believed, never once let anger make his decisions for him. It's a story about what happens when you stop reacting and start building. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own life, the relationships you're in, the way you're being seen, the plan you haven't started yet, then this channel is exactly where you need to be. We don't just tell stories here. We tell the stories that remind you who you are. Hit subscribe. Ring that bell. Drop a comment below. Tell us, who in your life underestimated you? And what did you do about it? Because the best stories aren't always the ones we watch. Sometimes, they're the ones we're still writing. We'll see you in the next one. Medium White Star Life Lesson. End card. The most powerful response to disrespect is not anger. It is architecture. Build quietly. Move precisely. Let your results do the speaking, when the time is exactly right. Silence is not weakness. Patience is not passivity. And the person who laughs at your dream today may one day answer to it. Build anyway.